you understand anything that you pick out. So now when you come to the prayer, this context and background acts as guardrails. If you go to the bowling alley at East Park, and you keep throwing the balls and missing the what do you call those things? Pegs or something. Skittles. Yeah, whatever they're called. They'll put rails for you. They'll lift rails so that as the ball hits this side, hits this side, hits this side, it's guaranteed to finally hit the balls and not fall into those little, things. That's what context does for us. It protects us from falling off this side and falling off this side in our interpretation, and we are kept within the bounds of the message and the idea and the flow of that text. So it will keep you from taking any statement in John 17 in the prayer and take it in the wrong direction, because you understand what the context in which the prayer is being made. A person who has just arrived and begins to try and get meaning from John 17 without proper regard to that context is more likely to go off tangent and even miss the point and not appreciate a lot of what Jesus is saying, simply because they are unaware of that paragraph or chapter context. So that's the context of the chapter. There's also the context of the book that shapes and helps us understand John 17. That's the example we're trying to look at, right? You're trying to look at a verse in John 17. How does the context of the book help? Thankfully, the New Testament books are a lot easier. Some of them where the writer even tells us, as does John, his purpose for writing, which is that his readers may believe that Jesus is the Son of God and have life in his name. So everything that John gives us in his book is meant to take us to that end. He's trying to get us to believe that Jesus is the Son of God. So John feels, listen to this carefully, that giving us those details about Christ's interaction with his disciples over the course of 5 chapters, John only has about 21 chapters. That's 1/3 of the whole book dedicated to his interaction with his disciples. Right? So by zooming out and looking now at the context of the book, you're like, whoa, why is it important for John to do what no other gospel writer does, to go to great lengths to open up Christ's interaction with his disciples? He wants us to see that though Jesus was under tremendous pressure and stress, he was still committed to his disciples and eager to see them comforted and prepared for the difficult problems that will lie ahead. And that really shapes how you read John 17 or any of those chapters for that matter. When you understand the background and context and goal and message of the book. And it does away with ideas that, you read John say, this is written so that you may believe, my readers may believe. And for you as a Christian, you're thinking, okay, so it's for non-believers. No. The context will guide you, the book context will guide you to see that, no, this is not for non-believers. Those guys were believers. This is for believers. That believers need to also believe and keep believing that Jesus is the Son of God. And what helps that is to see the care of Jesus for his disciples. And so when you're reading any detail in that section, that hits you. And it even begins to guide you in your application, because if you're reading as a believer, that becomes very relevant for you. That John felt that if we see Christ's care for his disciples over 5 chapters, perhaps we'll see Christ's care for us. And then we need the context of the Bible. We need to know where we are in the process of biblical revelation, in the unfolding of biblical revelation. What they knew in Genesis is not what they knew by the time of Revelation. All right? There was a build-up, and more knowledge and revelation was coming to God's people along the way. Where are we on this timeline of biblical revelation? What period are we dealing with in John 17? We are not with Moses and the Israelites in the wilderness. We are not with Joshua in the promised land. We are not with David and Solomon during the days of the kings. We are not in the prophets with Jeremiah and Isaiah. Or where are we, right? We are not even in the epistles yet. That's too far forward. The letters of the leaders of the church to the various churches. No, we are right before that. We are in the Gospels, which are all about the person and work of Christ. We are at the very beginning of the New Testament when Christ has come on the scene, and the work of God will take this tremendous shift like never before. That helps you interpret any section you are in. And so these levels of context shape how we interpret the passage and from the observations we've made of a passage. Second example quickly is 1 Corinthians 13. I picked that one because it's the famous love chapter. We only hear it read at weddings, right? Or maybe when you are trying to chaff your wife or chaff your girlfriend or something, and you're sort of saying love is patient and love is kind, and this sweet little write-up about love. So the famous passage, this has to be the most famous passage in the 16 chapters of 1 Corinthians, and it's just this small section, 4 to 7. 1 Corinthians 13, love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Beautiful. When we come to this passage, we will end up endangering ourselves to find wrong applications if we are unaware of the context. And we'll only use it at weddings. Context must guide us to know where it is appropriate to use this passage. It's primary application, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with using it as a wedding, but if you just see it as a wedding text, as this nice love text between a boyfriend or girlfriend, husband or wife, then you would have really missed out on the significance of this passage. So let's begin with what's the first level of context, this paragraph or chapter context, right? This passage falls in a much larger section that actually begins at chapter 12. And normally I was in 2 Corinthians. Normally you see these shifts in subjects in 1 Corinthians with the word now. But how do you pick such things? You've got to read the book, right? Reread a few chapters. You say, okay, I want to zero in into this chapter. Let me read at least this chapter before and the chapter after. Then you pick up these kinds of things by being concerned with the context. So you see chapter 12, now concerning spiritual gifts. He's changed gears. And he continues until chapter 15, where he says in verse 1, now I would remind you, brothers, of the gospel I preach. So he keeps shifting his subject with this now thing, right? So this love chapter is actually couched, or this love section that we call, the love chapter or whatever, is actually couched in this wider section on spiritual gifts. Paul's discussion about love is in the context of spiritual gifts. Just look at how chapter 11 ends. Is it chapter 11? Oh, sorry, chapter 12 ends, leading up to 13, which we famously call the love chapter. Verse 31, earnestly desire the higher gifts, right? This is about spiritual gifts in chapter 12. And then what does he say? And I will show you a still more excellent way. He then shows, from verse 1 to verse 3 of the next chapter, chapter 13, that love is better than spiritual gifts. Verse 1, it's better than tongues. Verse 2, it's better than prophecy. Verse 3, it's better than sacrificial giving of property and even of your own life. Love beats all that. And you see the connection in verse 8, which ends this famous love section. Love never ends. What's the superiority of love? How is love better than the spiritual gifts? As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. Right? But love will endure. Love never ends, as he says there. And that theme of the superiority of love and the primacy of love goes into verse 14 of chapter 13, where he shows that gifts exercised in love are focused on blessing and benefiting others rather than showing off. That's the context of the chapter. That's where the love text lies. So you're missing out on the juice of this passage when you only teach it at weddings. But when now people are fighting, in the church, the last thing in your mind is the love chapter, right? No, that's for married people. Love is kind, love is... No, that's exactly where you need to go. Because that's the issue. It's that people don't have this view of love that if I can have love, right? Though I don't have any of these other things, I'll be great. It will be super. Everything will be fine. And I'll be most effective in the church and in the kingdom. That's the context of the chapter. What's the context of the book? Let's zoom out further. What is 1 Corinthians about? All you need to do is read through the book, and you pick up that this is a wowed church. Did you hear the word I used? Wowed. This is a crazy church. The gifts are being exercised in this church in a very disorderly and selfish way. There is confusion about, you see that in chapter 12, 13, 14. There is confusion about the resurrection. And Paul takes nearly 60 verses clearing that up in chapter 15. There is confusion about the role of women. There was division. You see that in chapter 1 and chapter 11. In the church. Church was splitting up. There's confusion about the Lord's Supper. Some are overeating. Some are finishing the food before others can eat. Is that sounding familiar, Hugh? I was shocked too when I was hearing some of the issues coming out of our lunch. I was like, wow, 1 Corinthians, huh? Reincarnate, it's back. My goodness, we thought the Bible, we left it in the past. Some are getting drunk. Thank goodness we haven't gotten to those levels. At the meal with the church. People are suing each other in the church. The church is turning a blind eye to sin. Gross sin. Which Paul says even the world doesn't tolerate this. Where a man sleeps with his father's wife. And there is a disregard for Paul and his calling as an apostle. He starts with that in chapter 1. Some are saying I follow Paul. Some are saying I follow Apollos. This is a messed up church. You don't need a commentary.